So today I'm going to be making some panel clamps. This will cost a few pence shy of £30, unless of course you've got any bits and pieces lying around. What we're going to need is a 8 foot of 4x2 CLS, 4 M10 fully threaded hex bolts. I used 150mm long ones. Some M10 threaded inserts. I put 10 in each of my clamps. Obviously you can position them how you see fit. Some 38mm penny washers and some M10 wing nuts. Now I decided to make these clamps because I recently built a Murphy's bar. There's a video for that, I'll leave a description below. But the glue up for the tabletop on that was a bit of a disaster. So after I'd done that, I googled and searched for some better clamps that I could buy for myself. Now any I liked were either out of stock or very expensive, 160 to 260 pound depending on the size of them. I had this little idea in my head how I could make my own. I searched YouTube expecting to find loads of them, but I actually couldn't find any tutorials of anyone doing anything like this. And I'm sure there are loads, and I'm sure there's no way I'm the first. I found a guy who'd made metal ones similar-ish. There was a couple of very complicated jigs for repetitive type of stuff, but nothing straightforward and simple as this. So let's get to it. The first thing I did was mark out for my holes. I'm going to be doing 96mm centres. Obviously you can pick and choose any size you want. The reason I'm going for 96mm is because in a few weeks time I'm hoping to get time to drill a load of holes in my workbench and make it into an MFT top, and the hex bolts from measurement look like they will just about fit into the holes, so that would be really handy. So I put a 12mm drill bit into my drill press and set the drill depth to 10mm. This was to take the threaded inserts. Then I changed to a 10mm bit and drilled as deep as my drill press will go. Fortunately it just goes past the halfway point, so when I rip the CLS down the middle I've got marks to carry on drilling to keep the holes all nice and lined up. Then it was over to the table saw where I ripped both of my clamps straight down the centre. Then it was back to the drill press to carry on drilling the holes all the way through onto the side. You can just see in the video where I was fortunate that my drill just marked each of my holes, so I was able to follow it on. Now the mistake I made here was I went all the way through and got a nice chunk of tear out. So I changed to a smaller drill piece and drilled a pilot hole through all of my holes. Then changed back to the 10mm drill and I drilled halfway through each side to avoid any future tear out. Next I hammered in the threaded inserts. These were a lovely snug fit. Now of course you could countersink these if you wanted, but given as I'm hoping that the threaded hex bolts are going to fit into my future MFT holes, I wasn't too worried about this. Then I got out a ratchet and a socket to put the bolts in. I soon discovered that this was going to be a bit time consuming, so off to my van to find an attachment to fit it on my drill. Much quicker. So, time to test it out. Now I lay a piece of scrap wood against the front hex bolts, lay out 3 pieces of random wood that I've got lying around that I'm going to try and glue up to mark out the positions for the rear hex bolts. I have another piece of scrap wood that's going to take up the gap. Now this will probably vary from glue up to glue up depending on where the pieces finish for the back nut, but a bit of scrap wood will probably always be available, or you can just rip a piece down, because you would probably only want sort of a 1/4 of an inch gap really for the folding wedges to work. So I then put the rear hex bolts in the right position. So now it's time to glue it up. So I put some glue on the first piece that we're going to stick together, and as I'm doing that I suddenly realise we're going to need something to stop all the wood from sticking together, the squeeze out that is, from sticking to the clamps. So off to the van to get some cling film out of my decorator's pot. I then wrapped some cling film around the bottom part of the clamps to stop the squeeze out sticking to it. Now I could have just probably put a piece on the top, but I was in a bit of a rush now. I've flustered myself. So back to the glue up. I lay the first piece down that's got the glue on, put the second piece to it, and glue up the third piece. Then I can place the back piece of scrap wood in position, and then the 2 folding wedges. Make sure everything's just in the right place. And then we can tap the folding wedges, make it nice and tight, just so we can see a bit of squeeze out. Added some more cling film to the top part of the clamps to make sure it doesn't stick. I then realised they were so tight to get on that we was going to have to make the top holes a little bit wider, because there's no need for them to be as tight as that, not given the fact that we're putting 38mm washers on there. The next problem then to iron out was going to be the nuts. Now I had some nylon nuts lying around. These turned out to be a real pain. So as you can see, as I did it up, it started to undo the hex bolt out from the bottom of the inserted threads. You can see it lifting the clamps up off the table. So I realised I was going to have to get a spanner to hold that down. So with a spanner holding the bottom of the hex bolt, I was able to do the nylon nuts up with my ratchet and socket. Now this took an age, and definitely the wing nuts were going to be purchased. So the next day I came in to take it all apart and see how we got on. Again, undoing these nylon nuts was just such a chore. But since I got the first nut off, I had to just try out the wing nut just to make sure this was going to be a good idea for the future. And yeah, happy days, on and off in an instant. So the next teething problem was getting the top part of the clamps off. This was a real nuisance. They'd obviously shrunk overnight and they were very, very tight. As I said earlier, I did realise that we was going to have to make these holes wider for the next time I used them. Now I mucked about for quite a while trying to lever the top parts of the clamps off. Eventually I got them out and was able to get the 3 pieces of wood that I glued up out. I then realised the simplest thing to have done would have been to got the screwdriver and just undone the hex nuts from underneath, and it would have come out really easy. But I didn't realise that until it was too late. So the main purpose of this was to glue up these 3 boards, and they come out lovely. Nice joints, nice and flat. So a few days later I came into the workshop and I widened all the top parts of the brackets to 12mm. So the final design has been refined after a few teething problems. So we've ended up with the M10 fully threaded bolts going through the captive insert threads. Now the reason I went with the insert threads is to hopefully give the clamp some longevity, and also it helps makes the bolts much sturdier as they come through the other side. So as I said before, the reason I didn't countersink the hex bolts is because at some point I'm going to put some MFT holes into my worktop there, and then they should just fit into the holes. So when I've hopefully then they'll be nice and solid and there'll be less movement. So to recap, we had a 12mm hole drilled about 10mm depth for the captive inserts. Then we changed to a 10mm drill bit which we drilled virtually all the way through, split the clamps in half and then drilled the rest of the way through with a 10mm drill bit. We've since refined that and drilled the top part through with the 12mm drill bit so that the clamps go on nice and easily. So the MFT holes should stop the clamps from sliding around. Not that that's a big issue anyway. Then we'll have a piece of scrap wood at the front on the front hex bolts, and depending on what you're gluing up, obviously the rear hex bolts will have a different location. A piece of scrap wood will then go at the back. This size will probably vary, so again it can a piece lying around or rip a piece down. Then the folding wedges can go into place, and even just pushing them in by hand, it is very solid. So once you tap it in with a hammer, the glue squeezes out. And now with the top parts drilled to 12mm, they'll slot in nice and easily. So pop the washers on the top, and then the wing nuts, which obviously a massive improvement over the nylon nuts that I had lying around, which were just a complete nightmare. So if you need to do big wide glue ups, obviously you can make more, or you can just bolster it up with your own sash clamps that you already got. Overall, I'm really pleased with this, and I'm looking forward to trying it out on my next project, which is going to be my first cutting board, so keep an eye out for that. I'll leave links below for everything that I bought. So thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I hope it was useful in some way, and if it was, please show me some love by hitting that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.